So I'm excited for all of you to get to see and listen to me get to interview one of my favorite people in the whole world. He was my instructor at TSTC when I was a student, and then I was lucky enough to be able to come back and be his coworker. He has provided mentorship for me for the last 7 years through the collision industry, and he has a lot of great advice to offer whenever it comes to having patience and teaching and everything about he just knows so much about the collision industry, and I can't wait for you all to hear him. Here we go.
Hi, I'm Jana, and welcome to Auto Body Tech Experience. Today I'm here with my hero and mentor. This is the only time you'll ever hear me say this name, Mr. Tracy Marshall. I have never called him by his first name, and I don't intend to start now. But for you guys, I'm going to go ahead and throw that in there. So he has a very fascinating story, and I know there's a lot of my classmates and other students that are wanting to see the answers to these questions. I've actually had more submitted a calla that he thought he was going to take over the interview, but I'm going to ask what I want, and then I'll ask a few of his questions. Okay, so start with how you got into the collision industry.
Into the collision industry. Well, if I go way back to being a 12, 13-year-old, that's how I first got started into looking at cars. Prior to that, in most of my life, I grew up in a rural community, and really I was kind of a cowboy. We had horses, and we lived and breathed cowboy. We would go to the school library and look at all the cowboy stuff, and then one day my grandpa, who had a service station, he said, "Hey, I think this older woman has this old car for sale. I don't know if you'd be interested or not." And so I was probably 13 and a half, probably February of my sophomore year or so. And I said, "Yeah, I'll go look at it, Grandpa." And so we went by and we looked at it, and sure enough, it was a complete car and had a bunch of junk in it. And so that kind of weighed on my mind. And so I eventually bought the car, paid $150 for my first car.
$150. I remember whenever there used to be ads like that.
Yeah. And took it up to my grandpa's station, and he, of course, he helped me look it over. And I think at the time we got it running. The biggest disadvantage of that car was that it was painted salmon pink from the factory. It was a 59 Ford Galaxy 500. And at that moment, I decided I was going to learn how to paint cars, because I was not going to drive a salmon pink car around. Some might think that's a classic color, but to me, even today, it's just salmon pink, and I'm not going to get caught in it.
My St. Charles cabinets from the 1950s are salmon pink.
That would be fine for a kitchen, but for a car...
Oh, no, I'm painting mine too. That's one of the reasons that I came to collision school, was to learn how to paint my metal cabinets. That's one of the few things.
So I started engrossing myself kind of away from being so much involved with rural things, and all of a sudden cars were in the forefront. And so I started training myself by reading as much as I could on how to paint a car. And that's how I initially learned how to paint a car, was just kind of a self-taught thing. My grandpa had an old suction cup gun that was probably worth $40 back then, but today you could probably find them as doorstops. But then as I got the car ready to try and get it ready for paint, I happened to notice this little odd place down on the rocker panel, and I kicked it, and my foot went in the rocker panel. And so at that point, I decided I need to learn how to do body work. So actually, my grandfather, before he moved to Northwest Kansas to open up his service station, he actually did frame work in a place in Colorado. And so he was kind of a collision tech, but it wasn't anything that he really enjoyed, I think. I think he just knew a little bit about the industry. So anyway, long story short, I learned how to repair the vehicle. I painted that vehicle. I had a guy in our hometown who had a body shop, and he came by one day and said, "Oh, that turned out pretty good." And I always thought that was pretty good coming from him. So that kind of spurred
kind of how we all feel whenever we get a compliment from him.
Yeah, I assume so. But I like to push everybody to try and make sure they find their best abilities. So anyway, I continued to play around with cars from that point on. Painted 2 or 3 other cars in the area. Started getting into doing some airbrush work and did some airbrush work on some cars. And of course, my friends were also inclined to get into cars at the time. So we all had mechanical projects, paint and body projects, and this was just all basically in high school stuff.
That used to be kind of a common thing. I can remember in high school, all the guys be out in the parking lot, have all their hoods popped up. After that, we'd go over to somebody's house or somebody's shop, and they'd all be out there working, and you don't really see that anymore.
Exactly. It's hard to find that. And what that does is it develops a camaraderie, and you kind of learn from your all's mistakes, and everybody enjoys it, basically. And some continue to pursue that as a career, or at least maybe some backyard stuff, and others just are good with it and go on to something else. But yeah, you're right. I don't think that is quite the standard anymore, especially at schools, because of all the stuff that's going on nowadays. But it seems like over the years, people that have an interest in cars or a yearn for cars, they always seem to kind of group together. So it's always something that is good to bring into the mix of a crowd. Once I completed high school, I went into the service, went into the Navy, and I probably could have stayed and became part owner with my younger brother eventually on my grandfather's station. But I think for some reason he understood that we all just needed to get away from things there. I mean, it was a small town, and it was a great place to grow up, but I think it was just a way for us to kind of, and I hate to use the word escape, because it's not.
I'm from a small town too. I get it.
Yeah, and it's not like I felt like, oh my gosh, I got to get out of here. The service was just an opportunity, and it seemed like a good thing. Initially, when I enrolled in the Navy, they had a job description that was actually basically a commercial artist. And so I also did a lot of artwork and sculpture work and stuff when I was in high school. And so that
kind of runs in your family, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. My dad, gosh, I remember being on his armchair as a kid and growing up, and he would be drawing pictures for me, and I'd say, Dad, draw this. And yes, he continued actually doing lots of artwork. And
he painted murals on the school hallway, right?
He did.
You say there's one of them that's still there?
Yes, there's quite a few murals in the local high school that he painted, and he was always, he had an eye for color. He was a painter by trade, house painter, commercial house painter.
Which is also where Marshall started. He didn't mention that part.
Yeah. So I did a lot of house painting and a lot of coloring. So everything it's amazing how all those little things that you learn are applied to what we do today. And it all seems to be normal. I mean, but most people don't get a lot of those experiences. I had a lot of good experiences, and I can't deny that. I mean, that was a big benefit for my whole life. So anyway, we did a spell as I was going into the military, about 2 months before I actually went to boot camp, they said, oh, that rate is no longer available. What do you want to do now? So I decided I like to work on jets. And so I became a jet mechanic, basically. And so that was what I did in the service. You have to go through, of course, boot camp. I spent my 17th birthday. I was in boot camp. And then I went on to some training facilities in Memphis, and then eventually ended up kind of down on the coast, about an hour north of Corpus Christi. They had a big naval training air station down there. So that's kind of how my life started out from high school.
That's how he got to Texas from Missouri.
That's true. From Kansas to
Missouri's where my mom's from.
Right.
I always mess that up.
Yeah.
I mess that up all the time.
Yep.
He is from Kansas. My mom is from Missouri, right on the border next to Kansas.
May as well be about the same kind of area to grow up in, though. So anyway, ended up in that naval base, and that was actually the first stop for pilots coming out of their first level of training in Florida, and then they would come to this training station near Corpus, and that was where they would actually earn their wings and learn how to fly. And so we were just maintenance, basically. We worked on their planes. Whenever they got ready to go learn how to land on the carrier, we would go to Key West, Florida, and we would troubleshoot down there. And
Well, that sounds like fun.
it was a lot of fun, a lot of fun, a lot of long hours, but it was very interesting. In Key West, for instance, for someone that grew up on a farm and
That's quite a culture shock.
didn't get to see a lot of things until I went to Key West. I saw a lot of firsts there in my life. But anyway, that was all fun and very memorable. And of course, even though I'm in the service, I enjoy cars. And so I'm always working on somebody's car or my own car. In the Navy world, they always have, well, even in the Army, I know they have hobby shops. And so people can go to these areas on base, and they would have like a garage, and you could rent tools, or not rent them, but check them out and work on your car. And so there was that available to us. And then as we got more together and learned everybody, you know, some of them were married and they would live in town, and they would have garages where we could do other things. And so I've always been just kind of dealing with cars and helping people with their cars. It just seems like the way of life.
To this day, every time we have something that comes up that we don't know how to fix, we're like, go talk to Marshall. And then somehow he waves his magic hands across it, and it looks better than it did when it was new.
Or we do the research together and we figger out the problem. But either way.
On that motorcycle helmet, that guy said he had taken it to everybody.
Oh.
No, it was the fender flare.
Yeah.
He had taken it to everybody, and they all told him it couldn't be fixed.
Yeah, I know. That was kind of odd.
It took Marshall a day and a half.
Yeah, it was pretty good, though. It was just experience letting me do my work. That's good, and that's what it's all about. That's the thing is I think a lot of people come into this industry because they saw it on TV, or they heard of somebody doing something kind of cool. Even magazines used to be another excuse, but even those are not as prevalent as they used to be.
No.
And when they do come to this school or go to, find a mentor somewhere, they don't have that back experience that allows them to kind of jump in. So when they do jump in, they get totally wet. They're near drowning most of the time because they don't have a lot of that life experience behind them. And I was just really fortunate to have a lot of that behind myself. When I got ready to get out of the service, I had to make a choice. Do I stay in the service? Do I get out of the service? The town where our airfield was close by, I was driving through it one day about 3 or 4 weeks before I was supposed to make that decision. And I noticed a sign in a parts store, hiring. And so for some reason, I decided to turn the car around and go into the parts store, and I applied for that. And it seemed to work out pretty good in the interview. And I explained to the guy, I'm kind of at a crossroads. If I stay in the service, I'm going to go on to be a flight engineer on C-130s. If I get out, then I would just pursue my automotive career. And so I was led to go the automotive way because the guy called me back and said, you can have the job if you decide to take it. And so a lot of prayer time in that, and it just worked out pretty good. I spent 3 years there in that parts department. It was an independent parts store. They sold paint, which is another benefit that I get out of my life. I was in charge of the paint department, and I had a relationship with all the body shops. And so we would go around to the body shops, just like you can imagine. Hey, what do you need? And they would call, and I would go back and order their supplies, mix their paint. Paint was mixed not on a digital scale back in those days, but with a set of balance weights. And in order to be really good at that, you had to figure out all the little neat things to do to make that work. But most of the time it worked very well. And it was great to have that relationship with the body shops because just like you going out and visiting body shops, you understand how that's a benefit to everyone. So,
find out a lot of stuff and a lot of resources that way.
yeah, and that's just building
And a lot of student jobs.
building that relationship. That's all that is. And so you can be the best person in the world and hide away and create some really good stuff. But if you share your work and get involved with some other people, there's a lot of benefits to that too.
Absolutely. Okay, so you were in the parts store.
Yep.
So where do we go from there?
Well, from there, being in the parts store and working parts and learning the parts is a big benefit when you're in the automotive world.
Absolutely. You want to try to get into every single thing that you can so that you understand how every part of the repair process works.
Yep. And that, again, was another benefit of me learning part numbers, learning how all that part of the industry works. That was a huge benefit. But at the same time, it didn't really satisfy my yearn to work on cars. And so about a year after I started working at the parts store, this new guy moved into town, and right across the street was an old garage. And he opened up a mechanic shop, which was good for him because all he had to do was walk across the street to get parts. Well, I noticed he had one bay that didn't ever get used. And so that eventually turned into a body shop and a mechanic shop. And so we would, I would finish work at the parts store, and then after a while I would go over and start working on whatever car or project I was working on. And so he didn't know anything about collision or refinishing, but I could go and help him with mechanic work. He very rarely came across the road or across the other bay there to help me on anything, but which was fine because he wasn't exactly the cleanest guy in the world, so I never really wanted him touching
anything. And we know how
anything.
important that is in our industry.
I felt like he had grease all over him, so I said, like, don't touch anything.
I also want to point something else out. So this is a joke we all have about Marshall. You notice how he said that he worked across the street and then he saw this bay over there? Anytime anything was ever going on here, we'd always wait because we knew that Marshall was going to be peeking around the corner somewhere to see what was going on. He's always trying to learn and discover something. And if he sees something, he is going to check it out. So I could just see him in that window over there, like, what's he going to do with that bay?
Yep. That's pretty much it right there.
That's so funny. So after that, you went into?
Well, let's see. After that, I actually, when we had that going for quite a while, I decided I just needed another change in my life. So that was a 3-year period at the parts store, and we did a few minor restorations and just overall paint jobs. That was back when you could do a paint job for $400 and still make a profit. But those days obviously are pretty gone, and if you don't realize that, go price a gallon.
You barely buy a can of clear for that.
Yes. So I decided I was going to go on the road for a while on my motorcycle. And so from March to the end of October of one year, this would be 1983, maybe 84, somewhere in there. I just went on the road for a year. And so I traveled basically, went back home to Kansas, and then I just went east and then south and then west and then north and then back down and then back into Kansas. So it was about a 13,000-mile trip, pretty much around the United States. I spent most of the time in the evenings in national parks back in the day when nobody freaked out about you just going into a national park and spending the night. So pitch a tent, enjoy the scenery and the nature, and get up the next morning and just ride on. I wish.
That's another thing about Mr. Marshall is he can make something out of nothing, out of everything. I've never seen anyone that can do pretty much everything and make something out of nothing like my dad does until I met Marshall. I think that's one of the reasons that I'm so fond of him is because I always grew up watching my dad do stuff like that. And then I get here and he's exactly the same way. So we're both like this. We're like looking at something that somebody's going to throw out. And we're like, what are we going to do with that?
I think that comes from growing up with not having a whole lot of money and just having to be inventive. But again, another benefit to lifestyle. So yeah, exactly.
So you come and you learn that skill and then you can apply that skill to what you found.
Yeah.
That's one of our favorite things is to
I
find
know.
stuff and build stuff out of nothing
know.
and make experiments and stuff.
You know, it's like coming to school here to learn. We don't teach restoration, but everything that we teach can be applied to a restoration. In fact, I can't think of anything that we teach that can't be applied to a restoration of a car. So unless possibly some aluminum welding and that kind of stuff. But even then
you could probably find a use
sure
for
could,
it.
Yeah. So anyway, those kind of things just keep applying all over the place. So I spent the time on the road. Finally landed home when it started getting kind of cold. I remember I was up in Wyoming and towards the 1st of October, and it was 32 degrees at night, and I was sleeping on the top of this little mesa, and it was like, man, I found the bottom of my sleeping bag that night. But anyway, obviously lived through all those experiences, and that was an awesome experience. I ran out of money somewhere around Washington State.
That tends to happen.
I started out with $400 in my pocket and started getting pretty low. Stopped to see an old Navy buddy in Washington State. A couple of days go by and we kind of get back in track with each other. And he goes, "Hey, I know this guy that's got a Camaro. He's got all these tools and everything, and he doesn't know how to do anything. You think you'd go over and help him?" And I said, "Sure." So we kind of went over and looked at the guy's deal, and he did. He had this like 1.5 size car garage, and it had air compressor, air tools. I mean, you name it. He had all these
and
tools.
He didn't know how to do anything?
He hadn't done anything. All he'd been doing is accumulating tools. And so it was like, I'm not for sure what year, 8, 9, 70. It's too far back to go, but it was that era of Camaro. And so I did probably back then $1,200 worth of body work for him over 3 days, and he paid me $100 because that's all I wanted. So
another reason it's a useful skill. You can just drop in anywhere and make some money.
That's true. It's a pretty invaluable.
Christmas coming up, go pick up a few jobs.
That's right. So anyway, I landed back home, and then I started thinking, when I had the shop down on the coast, we did a lot of paint work, a lot of rust repair, a lot of dent work and that kind of stuff, but never any heavy collision work. And I would go into some of these body shops and I would see them with a car up on a frame rack or something like that. And I thought, I would love to learn how to do that. So while I was on my motorcycle trip, I stopped in at a few of these places around the country that were supposedly schools that were training people on how to do collision work and paint work. And I never really found anything that really got me. And so when I got back home and spent a month or so there, I had met a young man when I lived down on the coast, and he was going to go to TSTC. And so back then it was TSTI. And so I gave him a call because we stayed in touch. And I said, how do you like that school down there? He said, "Oh, man, it's great. It's fabulous."
And this is the Waco campus. Did they have Harlingen? They didn't have the Harlingen campus.
I don't know if they had Harlingen. They probably had Sweetwater. But to be honest, Waco was it. I mean, I didn't even realize if there were any other campuses. So, So anyway, I drove down here after the first of the year, and I toured the campus and saw that they actually did some hands-on work on repairing frames and that kind of stuff. And I was sold.
It's always how we snag them.
Yeah.
You got to do the tour.
That's right. Come and do the tour. I mean, you'd be surprised what you learn and what you don't realize is possible in the industry.
Oh, I came and did my tour just out of nowhere. I called up here one day and decided to come do a tour, and I was registered before I left.
Well, it could happen that way. I mean, it's very exciting when you start looking at the possibilities and the opportunities. And hopefully you have a little bit of a craftsman feel to you, or maybe you're the kind of person that says, I kind of like to take that apart and put it back together, or at least take it apart and see how it works, maybe, and throw it in the trash. But at least you're kind of that way. It really helps a little bit. Or maybe you just like the way things look when they're nice and shiny, or maybe you're kind of addicted to color, you know, and there's a place for you. The industry has changed in such a way that originally we would do everything, paint and body work, everything. And so then eventually it started to specialize. And so we collision over here and refinishers over here. And if you look at that, it makes a lot of sense, because then you can become even better at what you're trying to do and become even more craftsman-like at your trade.
I think it's therapeutic.
Yes.
I enjoy just putting my earbuds in. I always ask them when I was at TSTC, when they come through and do a tour, I'd be like, how do you feel about sanding? If you don't like it, this probably isn't for you, because we do it on both sides and we do a lot of it.
That's true.
But one of my favorite things always was to put my earbuds in and just sand away.
Yeah.
When you're mad, when you're sad, whatever it is.
Yeah. I hear that.
It just washes your worries away.
A lot of people, I hear that a lot. So, I mean, that's true. So if you have got
that rage, you could go banging on the metal. There you go.
We have a lot of ways to get rid of some of that frustration.
Just don't do it when you're pulling on the car.
Right.
Not for the best when you're angry.
Right. There are times when you can do that and times you shouldn't.
So you went from, you came here with our other exceptional instructor, Mr. Fowler.
Yes, Mr. Fowler and I met here. That's true. And we have eventually both of us came back and started teaching here in the long run. So that was kind of cool. And neither of us at the time knew that we were coming here. We were just like turned a corner one day and was like, wow, what are you doing here? You visiting or something? No, I started work here. It's that kind of thing. So that was cool.
And the funny thing about the instructors, so they came back to work here with their original teacher that was in the first graduating class from the program.
That's true. That's true.
All of us come back and we work beside our instructors.
Yes.
So
right.
That's the funniest thing to me. And then whenever I came after I graduated, came back and was teaching here, I was with Mr. Marshall and Fowler, and they had taught all the rest of us.
Yeah. I mean, that's a testament to the program. I mean, that just makes it a good, solid program to work in. The working environment here, for the most part, has always been very good, and you can always rely on everyone. Everybody's got their back, and everybody's always ready to step up and help if need be.
Well, before I came here, I'd been at 3 other schools, and I guarantee you not a single one of those teachers knew my name. And we know basically everything about every student that's come through.
Yep.
So that's another difference. And we always took real interest in, matter of fact, was messaging with a couple of them the other day that are doing something else right now. And I'm wondering why they're not in a body shop, and we're working on getting them back in a body shop. So.
Yeah, especially if they showed some, talent or enjoyment for the body shop. It seems like a good thing to get into.
Yeah, you got to retain the ones that we can keep.
Yeah, definitely.
That seems to be the problem. So that's actually one of the questions that he had for you was, what is different about them going into the shop now as opposed to, okay, do you officially know? He never could tell us how long he's been here. Do you officially know how long you've been here now?
Well, I think it's over 26. I think it might be 27. It might be 27 years. Because I know 2 or 3 years ago they
he doesn't even keep track. He could have retired already, and he's still here. But so when you were placing students back then,
right?
Is there anything that's different now as far as when they're going into the industry? Have you noticed anything different when you talk to them, or so what would be different about them going into the field now?
All students over the whole course of all those years always say, when we got out into the shop, we realized how fast-paced everything was, and that there was just so much more we could learn that we didn't learn at school. And that was not a bad thing. We were not trying to keep anything away from anybody. It's just that our time was limited. Now, back then, if you want to use that, say 15 years ago, when we placed a student into a shop, they had a really good feel. They weren't quite as intimidated, I think, as they are nowadays. And I can only attribute that to having less time with them. Now we don't have the hours that we used to have.
When I came here, we were here almost 40 hours a week.
Yeah, I mean, it was, even when I went to school here back in the 80s, it was like going to a job. You would get here at 8 o'clock and you'd leave. I think we got out at 4 o'clock, and we did that 4 days a week. And then we were off on Fridays, which I thought was pretty cool. But when you showed up here, it was like you were coming to a job, and everybody was accountable for everything. It was a whole different scenario.
I don't know. When we were students, we stayed until they kicked us out. So we were here till 5, and they were like, "Get out! We have to go home."
Yeah, that's good. And I think there's a difference in newer generation coming in, even.
Yeah, they were a lot quicker. Are we getting out early today?
Yeah, we find that. So new students that are coming through the program now that go out into the industry, I'm pretty sure, just because we don't have the lab time and we've also lost the classroom time, they don't feel quite as good. But I think the industry has kind of stepped up, sort of, and they usually put the new students, the new employees, under the watchful wing of a mentor or someone.
And that's one of the benefits about some of these apprenticeships becoming a big thing too. And I actually talked about that in my interview with my previous employer. You can go check that out. I'll link it at the end. So let me check my questions here. Okay, so we talked about how you started in collision and about the rookies. So why did you become an educator?
Oh, well, that was just kind of by accident, actually. Once I graduated here, I worked in the production world for 6 or 7 years, and I really liked it, but I was mainly repairing heavy hit collisions. And so we were doing Porsches and BMWs that back in the 90s had a $10,000 plus repair bill.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were like, oh, it needs an entire new front end. So we would cut strut tires off and just rebuild the whole car. Or it needs a complete roof and quarter and B pillar. We would just do all that stuff. But in order to do that right, you had to spend time. And so even though I was used to turning in like 120 to 150 hours every week, I mean, that was just the norm. You still had to spread that repair out over a lot longer than what most insurance companies and customers wanted, until we finally got to a point where we would invite the customers into the shop and you'd say, this is what I'm doing. And your car looks crazy right now, but this is what I'm doing. And 90% of those customers said, you just take as long as you want. And when
they find out that you're trying to do it the right way and trying to do the best for them, they seem to be a lot more understanding.
When I first started in the production world, I got a lot of those. It was kind of a transitional period. I was going from fixing big dents to all of a sudden doing some collision work. And so what I started to see were these cars coming in that had had previous repairs. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this car was repaired like this. And so here, when I went through school here, we had training based on the iCar. And iCar was developed solely to make repairs better on cars. Mm-hmm. But that was their main function in life, was to educate technicians to repair the car better and what not to do. And so I started seeing all these cars put together with braze, with seam sealer, with rivets. And it just spurred me to say, I won't repair a car like that. There's no way I'm going to repair a car like that. And growing up, I was always pretty meticulous on trying to get everything the right way and try to get it that way the first time.
We don't get paid to do the job twice.
So I just continued to improve on my skills, and I got faster by doing it the right way. I always told everybody there's really no reason to cut any corners, because every time you cut a corner, it comes back.
It ends up costing you in the end. It takes so much longer.
I've seen,
if you didn't ruin the car to the point that it hurls out,
that you can even repair it again. So I had the whole time that I worked in production, I had one comeback, and that was because a lady returned her car, and her park light had come loose on the opposite side that we had repaired. And I don't know why the park light was like that, whether that was happened in the accident or whatever, but I screwed her park light back in, and she left happy. And that was my only comeback. And I say that because, not to brag or anything, but just to say, if you spend the time doing things right, then after a while, you're faster than the guy that's over there trying to cut corners. And you'll find that to be true in a body shop. Everybody's real good and happy and everything, but everybody's got their own little thing going on. And so you should just buckle down and don't worry about that guy that seems like he's kicking cars out left and right, because if you'll watch, a lot of times those cars kind of make a big circle and start coming back.
And it is no fun to watch them drive back in that drive and go, oh no.
So just do things right, learn how to do things right, and do them right all the time. Always do your best, and do your best better. I mean, that's the way you got to do it.
So how'd that get you to be an educator? That's where we were going with this.
That's where we were going with that. I got out of the production world, and I opened up my own shop here in Waco. Well, actually, I just opened it up to the public, because even when I was doing production work, I had another shop going. And so I can't get away from
The rumor
cars.
was, when I was a student, that he had a 5-year waiting list. That's what everybody always said.
That was always true, and it's actually still true. So anyway, the director of this school started hanging out when I opened my shop up to the main public. And so he would come out and he'd kind of chat. And then he had one of these big GMC RVs, one of those special ones that GMC created. And he wanted me to paint the roof. And I had a building big enough to where I could do it in. So I painted the roof for him, and he thought that turned out really good. And then I didn't see him for a couple of months. And then he shows up again. I'm like, why are you here? That's what I'm thinking. So he comes in, and he's like hanging out for a while, and I'm trying to get some work done. And he says, we've got this one instructor who is going to have surgery, and we were interested if you would come out to the school to be an adjunct instructor. In other words, fill in, help out. And so I thought, well, when are the hours and everything? How can I work that around my shop time? And so anyway, it worked out, and I came out here and did a semester of basic metal repair. And so I helped him out, earned a little extra money to offset what I wasn't doing at the shop. It worked out good for everybody. And on top of that, some of you are familiar with Skills. So Skills has always been here at school, and in our program, Skills is a pretty big deal.
Very big deal.
And so we've been doing that since after I graduated here. So probably since the early 90s, or maybe late 80s, they started Skills. And so somewhere about 4 or 5 years after I graduated, they invited me back to do the judging on the projects that the students would bring. So I was always kind of connected with the school. It wasn't that I just like cut ties and ran and hid.
That seems to be a common theme.
Yeah. Well,
there'll be instructors that I'm going to be interviewing. They were never my instructor. I know them because they came back and volunteered while I was a student, while I was an instructor. Everybody just seems to keep coming back to visit, participate, whatever it is.
Kind of help out. Yeah. Plus, it's kind of neat to just kind of keep up with all that and see what's going on. So anyway, we did the basic metal repair, and that was fun. And then time goes by, and they ask again. So some situation came up. So they wanted me to come back and do advanced collision for a semester. So I came back, and that's when I did the lab part of advanced collision, and they were just starting to get into the classroom stuff. And so one of our former instructors...
You did advanced collision?
one of our former
I
instructors.
tried to get this man to do the advanced collision part of my co-op forever. And he was, I don't do advanced. I do fundamentals.
Well, I think the fundamentals are important. The advance is fun, but the fundamentals are...
Advance is important too.
I agree. Anyway, one of our instructors, Carter, that she mentioned earlier, that had been in the first graduating class, was still here at the time. And so he did the classroom work, and then I did the lab work. And
now on Carter, he was part of helping build iCar, wasn't he?
Oh, yeah. Plus this director that I'm talking about, Mr. Lovejoy. I know that sounds like a kooky name, but...
A lot of y'all watching this are going to know who that is because I get asked about him all the time whenever I go out to shops and go recruiting.
Oh, okay. That's cool. Yeah, I mean, he was... Mr. Lovejoy and Mr. Carter, believe it or not, were very instrumental in spurring iCar on. I mean, they were sitting on the first... Lovejoy, for sure, was setting on the first board for iCar back when it was in its developmental stages. And TSTC itself had a pretty big role in helping iCar get motivated to go. They used to come and use our facility to put on little programs.
We're still a WQT site.
And so, yeah, we've had a good rapport with iCar since the day it was born because we were there on the fledgling footsteps of iCar, which is kind of interesting when you think about that. Not too many schools can say that.
No, that makes us a legacy.
Yeah, exactly. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't remember that legacy because some of those older people have gone. But
that's why we keep reminding them.
Yeah, that's right. So anyway, at the end of the advanced collision stint, they said, you know, we have an opening for another instructor. Would you be interested in that?
Now, Fowler was already here.
I think so. Yes, Fowler was here like maybe a few months before I accepted that. But I don't remember seeing Fowler. It was weird. And I may have, but I just don't remember.
Well, you were at a different part of the...
Yes.
Didn't you start at a different part?
We were not in the same areas in any of those times. Plus, he was big into refinishing, and we were doing collision.
To this day, he still is.
Still kind of separated even back then. So anyway, had a discussion with my wife and kind of talked about things, and we decided to throw our name in the hat, and they came back like an hour later and said, you can have the position if you want it. And I was thinking, there wasn't anybody else applying for that, were they? Anyway, I don't know.
That theme hasn't changed.
Yeah, that's probably true.
That's another shortage that we have is educators. Pretty sure the whole time I was here, we were looking for another instructor most of the time.
So I think some of you out there have been in the role of being a mentor, and you kind of, if you have a student that's willing, or an apprentice or another helper that really wants to learn, it's kind of a neat sensation to keep feeding that fuel.
Oh, there's nothing like it. There's nothing like it.
And
you're creating a legacy.
Yeah. And so you're just more than willing to divulge all these secrets or all of this wealth of knowledge and experience that you have on the student that wants to learn. And those that learn soak it up like a sponge.
Oh, yeah.
And others, I mean, it bounces off like a chrome wall, but it's so exciting to just teach. I mean, that is so much fun.
Or like when you go out to the shops and you see them.
Yes.
Like you go to the shop and then this person will be hiding from you around the corner. And it turns out that your students working there and they're out there. They're like real people now.
Yes.
Like real technicians.
Yes.
It's the craziest thing.
Yes. And it's just a good, fulfilling experience. And that's why I've stuck with it. I've just really enjoyed it. I still have my shop going on. I go out there and work.
Which he does at nighttime. And then gets up and he's the first one here all the time. And he'll go and work at the shop till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. So, but hey, that's just, I guess when you find your passion, you just, that's just a benefit of having that. Coming to work here, going to the shop, it seems like they're all kind of intertwined because they're in the same industry. And it just seems like that's what...
Kind of keeps you sharp too.
It does.
Because when you're the teacher, we get to touch things a little bit, or we'll get the piddle while we're in the class with the students, but we don't get, we make them do the repairs.
Right.
This isn't like some places where we just illustrate.
Yeah.
Like the students do the repairs here.
Yeah. Yeah.
We'll do a demo.
Very
but
hands-on. Yes. So you're right. Yeah. Having that extracurricular activity or that shop going on. Yeah. It's definitely a bonus. It keeps your painting skills up, your dent work skills up. And plus, if you're doing something a little different, you start researching, you know, what else is available out there. Oh, there's this new kind of filler, or there's this new this or that. And what do? You bring that back to the classroom and you share it with your students. And so that just keeps going round and round all the time.
Marshall was always our resident creator, builder around here. He makes all the lessons, and he's always updating everything in there like that. Every time you turn around, he's like, oh, there's a new body filler. Oh, there's this.
Yep.
Last time it was a hardener, right?
A new hardener that Evercoat came out with. You know, so had I not been in the right place at the right time to figure that out, then I'm like, oh, something new. And man, I just can't wait to share that with the students, because that just helps them.
And a lot of people think that because you stay in the same classes, that means you're just trying to do the same thing over and over. And they just don't realize how much time you spend in there changing your lessons constantly.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't look at that at all. I mean, I hope that most people in the technical education world don't do that they just show up to work every day and say, y'all go back to work.
Don't get complacent.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's ever changing. Anybody that's working, and we're even more behind than out in the shop. You guys, I know you're working on cars all day, but you need to be updating even more than us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's where the real work takes place. And if you're doing things without procedures, then
yeah, and that procedures have been preached here for quite a few years, and it has become more evident over the past 10 years.
Well, our methodology was always, I think I get this from you. I always teach the students that I'm going to teach you how to understand the procedures, how to look at the procedures, how to look at the product data sheets, so that you can take that knowledge of understanding those and apply it to anything. For example, we use Sherwin-Williams at TSTC. If they don't use Sherwin-Williams at the shop, they need to know how to use that product data sheet.
Yes.
So if they know how to use that, then they can apply it everywhere. And that seems to be a general rule going through this program, is that we try to teach them how to think for themselves, like how to research. Of course, if you'll give them the answer, they're going to come up to you and they're going to want the answer all the time.
Right.
You don't give them the answer. You make them find the answer. Make sure that you provide it somewhere. And Marshall's always been really good about that, is making sure that the information, and he'll kind of look over there and hint to you. And then if you don't get it, he'll just point at it and be like, hey, it's on the sheet over there. I picked up that same habit. It's when they come to us a lot of times now, it seems like they don't have, you and I have discussed this several times, they don't have that want to know why or how something works. So we always try to
quick answer.
So we always try to make them question and work toward that.
It makes me think of one of our other previous instructors, Mr. Kleibrink, and he was in refinishing, and many times he would say, so-and-so came up to me and said, how do I do this or that? And the first thing he would say is, what does the product manual say? I mean, he was always
the answer,
making them go find out the information themselves.
I mean, iCar test should have prepared them for that. I always told my students, if it says on there, one of the answers is check the procedures or the manual or anything. That's the answer to the question.
Answer. Yeah, exactly.
If it says it, that's the answer to the question. Exactly. And you should always know to refer back to that.
Yeah.
So we really stress that.
Yeah, and it's another thing with not being complacent. When I was in the service working on jet aircraft, one of the things that they always stressed was, don't try to remember the torque values for this or this or this. Mm-hmm. Every time you go out and do a job on an engine or whatever, refer to the manual. We didn't have like printers and all that kind of stuff. So sometimes we would refer to the manual in the shop and make notes, or we would carry the manual out there on the flight line if we had to, or inside the hangar. But they always said, don't try to remember all this stuff. I mean, those of you that have been in the industry for a while, can you imagine how full your brain would be if you remembered every mixing ratio of every paint line or every procedure on every car that you're working on?
Well, that's not even an option anymore anyway. Every shop that I talk to talks about how things are changing within 6 months.
Yes.
I mean, so if you're using the same procedure you used on that vehicle from just a year before, or even just a different model from that production year.
Yeah. Changes from one year to the next are drastic sometimes.
Especially with the different. Oh, that reminds me of a question that I was supposed to ask you. Okay. So one thing that Marshall's always been really good at is explaining, I'm going to say the word wrong probably, metallurgy.
Oh, that's great.
And how metal works. And I would even have him dip into my co-op classes because he tells the story better than I do. So that is one of the things that your previous student wanted to know, how you understand how the concept of how metal works. How did that come to fruition for you?
Well, one thing about teaching is that if you don't know a lot about what you're teaching, then you need to go and research it.
Right.
And so when I get ready to do a lesson, especially something new, or if we go back, many years ago when I did have a new lesson in front of me, I would have my own questions.
Mm-hmm.
So that question one day says, what is this metallurgy stuff? What is this? And so who better to learn about metallurgy than U.S. Steel? And come to find out that U.S. Steel has a whole lot of information on that. And if you stay connected to U.S. Steel website, which I did through the years, they change with the automotive industry, because guess where the automotive industry gets its steel? U.S. Steel.
Mm-hmm.
So in 2010, when U.S. Steel and all of the manufacturers decided, instead of staying separate, to actually start collaborating together, that's when we started seeing these advanced high-strength steels. Mm-hmm. In other words, the manufacturer was saying, Ford was saying, I need something strong right here that I can do. Mm-hmm. And so the steel companies were like, hey, I think we can do that. So everybody was trying to research and develop and come up with things to make the car better. And so I just couldn't help but learn about it. And so I just kept learning about it.
He can take material and just make it understandable for anybody. And he comes up with all these examples. Like how?
So that's just
how do you come about doing that?
I don't know. I think that's based on just my life experience. But when I'm telling something to a group of students, my other ego or my other person who's back behind there is going, someone's going to ask a question about how that is. How can you explain that better? And I'll interject that into the conversation. So I have this like alter person in the background.
Your person sitting on your little shoulder?
I guess so. And that's what helps me. And so as I'm explaining something or showing them how to use hammer and dolly or something, my mind is thinking, do you think they really understood that? And if not, what else could you use as an analogy to make that work? I've started using saran wrap stretched over a bucket, a 1 gallon can, stretched really tight to show you how stretched metal works.
How about the balloon?
And the balloon, I've interjected that into lessons. And so it's just simple things like that I guess I'm just blessed with being able to see like a different analogy of something, and then I just share it with the students. And I think that's made a big difference on a lot of students.
It does. And we all get so enveloped in it. And this other student that asked the question and I are a little bit nerdier than other people, I would say, probably. But it's very fascinating. Even my guys were sitting there, they were like trying to listen to the story, because he explains all about, okay, I'm going to mess it up, removing the boron.
Well, yeah, I mean,
to start creating these high strength steels and the advanced high strength steels and how that process works.
Yeah, and that's very interesting.
It is.
It's amazingly interesting, actually, because you imagine a piece of steel as a piece of steel.
Mm-hmm.
But when they dig that up from the ground, iron ore, they can't just squish it out and turn it into a flat piece of steel. It's amazing all the different levels and things that it undergoes to make it usable. Out of the ground, most of the time, steel is probably nothing better for than maybe a sword or a knife or something. You definitely can't just do it right off the bat.
Kind of like transform it into a diamond.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway.
So another thing that I always leaned on you for was, okay, so if there's anybody that's doing mentorship or considering being an educator or is currently an educator and they struggle with patience with this generation, or they're wanting to consider that, I always came to you and I'm like, Marshall, how do you keep your cool? How do you not make faces? How do you do this? If you could give them any advice on how to be a mentor without degrading or right, we're having such a hard time keeping people in the industry. And I know of some of the students that I've talked to that have gone into it. It's, even though I told them they should be thick-skinned and not worry so much about what people say to them, because it is a tough industry. I went in as a female. Okay, so I get that. I understand. But when you're going to actually try to teach them something, I don't think you realize how much they're looking to you as their mentor. Like, you know, you're their mentor, but you don't realize how much your opinion matters. And so there's a certain way that to deal with them. Like, I used to get told all the time that my face told on me whenever I was talking to a student if they did something really silly.
Yeah.
And Marshall, he can control all of it. So what would your advice be to somebody that was mentoring or teaching as an educator, anything, in order to have the patience?
Well, I think in that kind of situation, to a certain extent, you have to separate or draw a line between you and your student or your apprentice. And so as a mentor or as an educator, you have to simply appear to the student that you have a very high standard. And if you have high standards, that's even better. But I mean, you're not trying to act like you're like the king of kings or anything like that. You just kind of draw that line, at least at the beginning. And you have to keep that standard high, and the student sees that. And I think they work towards that. And then at some point, you open the door. And
so I make notes whenever I think of things. And I have to say this while I have it. So I'm going to read it exactly how I have it. Marshall is known for being that person that you want his respect. No matter who it has been, no matter who's been through here, it's always impressive when he compliments you. Even when we got older and we were working beside him, we go from being a student trying to earn like the smile or the laugh or the compliment, and then you go to work beside him, and we still do that. And it's the funniest thing. So people care what he thinks, and he doesn't have to scold or belittle. You do your best in his class because you want him to be proud of you. And everybody's goal is to get a compliment or a laugh out of Marshall, and that is a real achievement. And anybody that you talk to will tell you that. Because I always tell him, even without saying anything, he has the best backhanded compliments there ever was. And he can say something to you, and it'll take you a minute to realize that he just critiqued you and you thought he was complimenting you. So...
and it is a compliment.
It's the tone he keeps whenever he's telling you something.
You just got to set that standard high, and just the student, if their passion is working on this, or if you're a mentor to someone and their passion is to get better, to actually learn how to work on these cars, whether it's painting or collision or whatever. As long as they know that standard is a little above them all the time, then they're going to try to reach that. And then, like I say, you open that door at some point, and then you share things, and then it becomes completely different.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we can't do this forever. Somebody's got to take our place.
Yeah.
So why not pass that on?
Definitely.
And like you said earlier, we both said, seeing our students in the shop, or they have a big tendency to still drop in and visit
they do.
all the time.
They do.
Or they will call you and text you, and I still do that to my previous instructors, including him.
I have students that every once in a while, day or night, all of a sudden here comes this text, and I don't usually know the person, and it's like, here's this text, and they'll say, "Hey, Marshall, this is," and then I'm like, "Oh yeah, okay," because we do remember most of them. And then it's
the newer generation, they don't identify themselves. You have to get them to say, I'm going to need you to tell me who this is.
Yeah, exactly. So I've said, "Who is this?" many times. So anyway, I've answered questions, helped some people. I mean, people struggle with things that I guess they're not able to get out of their management, or maybe they're just on their own. Having a mentor is not the norm all the time.
No, it's not.
And so if you can be that area where they can come and express their concerns or get your opinion on something, and it helps them get to the next step, then that's the whole point of being there. I mean, that's just awesome.
So I watched this WrenchWay. Actually had George Aarons the other day and Jay, and they were talking. They did a survey of technicians. Unfortunately, I'm sad to report that only 1% of collision repair technicians took place in this survey, and all of it was automotive and diesel mostly. So do better, guys.
I know we're busy, but
yes, that is important. What are we approaching 80% almost? We were at 77, 78% shortage.
Yeah, it's definitely a big deal.
So it went through there, and they were talking about what the techs need, like what their biggest wants are, whether it's pay. You mentioned management communication is a big factor in there. But what caught my attention was the end, where they started talking about, and I've noticed this myself. We have so many technicians, and even technicians that are taking on mentor roles, that are giving negative impressions of our industry. And I'm going to ask you in a moment what you think is causing the shortage and the inability to retain these technicians, especially the new ones. But my question to you is, I hear a lot of negativity and techs discouraging others from coming into this industry. And I actually made a post in a couple forums the other day asking what you would tell a student or somebody that might be looking into coming into this industry if I was trying to recruit someone. And I was getting texts that were saying some crazy things on there. And I understand that we have issues with getting paid sometimes, and with the insurance companies and things like that. So at the end of that discussion where they were talking about that survey, they were talking about all these techs having these negative things to say. So what would you say to contradict the negativity? You obviously don't agree with that, or you wouldn't come in here every day.
Right. Well, I think the negativity probably spurs from, we have a change in the type of worker that's in any technical field right now. We have a lot of people my age or a little older that are retiring and getting out of the business, and they're not coming back as a mentor on the side or going into education or anything like that. They're just getting out. So the new students that are coming in, or the generation that's been in there for maybe 7 or 8 years, I think they do see a lot of things that used to be just the way things are. I mean, in some fields, you just have to expect that this is the way things are going to work. And for a new person to come in and have maybe this idea that he should be making a lot more money, or that somebody should be giving him a pat on the back every time he turns around.
Another thing we always taught our students is to be humble.
Yeah.
And you have to learn everything that you can, and it's going to take time. We don't promise you that you're going to walk out there and be an A-Tech making $100,000 a year.
And I think that's the key, is it's going to take time.
But what they're saying to them is run, don't do this. It's a horrible industry. And we can't be doing that. And there's even mentors that are doing that.
But I think that's got to be because their true passion, those people that are showing that negativity, is really not to be working on the cars. I mean, really, why would you have that negativity? I mean, we have things in our own lives that go wrong, but we just say, well, you know, I'll deal with that, or I'll do this to make them happy, or something like that. But in reality, we see it from a different light. And then if somebody says, hey, do you think I should come and do that? And you could say, well, yeah, I think you should, because if you really like it. I mean, if your passion is to work on the car, I think the real thing that maybe some of them are missing is that when I'm in the shop working, I'm not worried about what the management is doing. I don't care if the secretary is over there doing something else. I'm working on this car. And if you get into that mode of where you're actually trying to be a craftsman working in the industry is here and your projects are here. And if you can develop that and not be worried so much about how much you're going to be making, because if you continue doing good work, you're going to start making even more. And I really find it hard to see where that negativity would come from if it's someone that has a passion for the industry, or perhaps their negativity is spurred from where they're working. Maybe that's just not a good environment. And in that case, I would say, even though we hate change, find a different place.
Well, I'm going to go back to, my mom always said that if you can't say anything nice, then don't say anything at all. What do you achieve by discouraging a bunch of people? If you, there are times, my husband is a technician. He's not a collision technician. He's an automotive technician. And there will be days that he is very frustrated. And I will just tell him, if you're that miserable, quit. I wouldn't want you working on my car if you hate it that much. Because when you're that miserable, you're going to make that many more mistakes. I don't care who you are, how great you are. So...
And that's just the environment he's working in. It's not that he hates working on cars.
Right.
Yeah, it's the politics or whatever.
And it's not like that all the time. Yeah. But, I mean, there are some people that I do meet that do have that attitude overall. And if you have that attitude, and I ask them whenever they make those comments to me, I'm like, are you still in the industry?
Right. Yeah.
Why? Why are you still in the industry? You shouldn't be discouraging other people from going into the industry because of that. So in order to counteract that, that's what I would say. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. I think if you have that passion and everything, and like you say, if you can't say anything good, then just go back to work.
I remember my first week at my shop, there was someone that came and tried to put their little rain cloud on my parade, and they were like, "What are you smiling about?
Yeah.
What are you so happy about?" I'm excited to be here.
Yeah.
And they were like, "Oh, just give it a week. You won't be." And they were wrong.
Yeah.
And somebody told me that whenever I went to be an educator also, and they were wrong also.
Yeah. We deal with people like that all the time. And that's their choice to make that out of their lives. And that's unfortunate. But, man, we don't have to do that.
No.
Not at all.
We don't. And
I mean, it's not like we're all cheery and happy all the time, but
no, I mean, absolutely. Who is?
Yeah, but
if they are, they're on some prescription drug. I'm just saying. I probably shouldn't say that, but nobody's happy all the time.
Yeah. So you just got to roll with that. Yeah.
So, any of you that are considering going into the industry, or any you techs that are considering, and it doesn't just have to be techs. I've seen it from estimators. I've seen it from all kinds of people in our industry. And number one, if you hate it so much, why are you still in it? I'm just telling you, I'm gonna be blunt.
Yeah.
Why are you still in it?
Yeah.
And if you do, keep it to yourself, because we're hurting bad enough.
Yeah.
And these cars are always going to have to be worked on. So if you hate it so much, move out of the way and let one of them move into your spot.
Yeah.
And maybe they'll be less negative about it. So
the other thing to consider that I just thought of, in our industry, painting a car and fixing the dents or repairing the frame on the car is just two little things. Our industry is like grown so much. There's estimating, which everybody should come to think of real quickly, but it's not just those three things. We've got people that specialize in ADAS equipment or doing that kind of work.
Production management's another one that I brought up. Nobody seemed to be thrilled about that role.
and we're losing things too at the same time. Like, for instance, upholstery shops, for instance. When's the last time you drove by and saw an upholstery shop somewhere? And
somebody actually asked me about that the other day. They were like, why don't you go do this? And I said, I went to fashion design school. I hated it then. I don't want to sew now.
But there are just so many facets in our industry. And so if you really aren't enjoying painting or working on a car in that respect, man, you can still be involved with cars. I mean, it's amazing.
We actually had a student that commented on my page the other day, and I'm trying to remember if it was a classmate. They actually go and buy the cars from auctions for the company, and they inspect them. I mean, and I'm like, tell me more about this job. I am all about, y'all reach out to me and tell me if you have some interesting job in this industry, because I'm all about, that's what this is for.
Yeah.
I am all about learning these things.
One of our students, if I'm not mistaken, went to work for Tesla, and they put him in.
We had several that went to work for Tesla.
And I think this one student, I don't remember who, but he went to California and he's writing technical manuals, procedurals for Tesla.
That was Hayden, wasn't it?
Well, I thought so, but anyway.
No, Carlos.
There you go. And so that's just one other little trail out there that leads to something else, and that might fit you better than.
That's another thing they were talking about in that WrenchWay meeting the other day. They were talking about how they evolved from this technician to doing this. And I think I can't remember if it was George or the other guy that was talking about how he ended up going and working for a manufacturer. I mean, there's so many paths.
That's another path. We have one of our instructors that went to work for Toyota, and he's not painting cars anymore. Yeah. He's not painting cars anymore, but he's still involved in the industry in a big way. And everything he does is always for the benefit of the.
Sorry, we ran out of memory. We had to refresh for a moment.
I see.
Okay.
So, I mean, we're just trying to benefit the students. And I think if you're in the industry working and you have the opportunity to work with another student as a mentor, then I think you should just simply do your best in trying to evolve that student or that person into someone that you're happy to work with instead of someone that you can't stand. And I realize there's personality differences, but if you decide to become a mentor, then that means you've got to kind of roll with some of those punches that might come through every now and then too.
Yeah, because it's not always easy. And this was actually mentioned in my previous video with my former employer also, about the different types of teams that could be mentor apprentices. And the struggle can be real sometimes. And if it's not a good fit, consider changing the team, or maybe work on your approach to it. I just want all of you in that influential role to understand that your opinion and how you treat them, that's going to affect them.
Yeah. More than you think.
Yes. Yeah. Like, definitely. They act like they don't care what you think. They do.
Yeah.
They absolutely do. Believe me. I've had students remind me way later. So.
Yeah.
Okay. we're going to start wrapping up. So we talked about why you became an educator. So I'm going to ask you to end on what characteristics do you think it takes to be a good technician? This is going to be a two-part question, okay? What characteristics do you think it takes? And there must be something that you see in a student that shows you that they're going to be successful, and what is that? So characteristics, and what do you see in them that shows you don't have to worry about them?
Well, as a technician, I think your first and foremost thing is to be curious and to want to
Absolutely
learn while you're learning. And that just makes you faster at what you're doing, because once you learn something new, then you apply it. And then you've got to have the patience for that learning period to actually come out good. So,
and if you don't want to learn, this is not the industry for you.
Yeah, I mean,
you're going to be a lifelong student.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what makes going to the job every day, whatever job it is in the industry, makes it worthwhile.
That's what makes it exciting for us.
Yeah.
We like change, we don't like change at the same time.
Yeah, and that's human nature, I'm sure.
But there's a lot of changes that excite us.
Yes.
So I love that answer. So if you are someone that is always questioning why, like just question everything and want to know more and understand more, this is a perfect career for you.
Yeah, it is. And
that's one of the reasons I went into the repair.
Yeah.
It's because it was something different all the time.
It is. And even if you're working in a dealership and you have the same kind of vehicles coming through, they're not always going to be the same.
No.
So you can learn and make things go a lot quicker, like how to remove that door, bumper, hood, whatever, without spending all the time that it says in the book, and make good money on it. But at the same time, each car that comes in that's got some damage to it, it's different each time.
Mm-hmm.
And that, again, just helps you keep your craftsmanship up in trying to make that repair good. And the other question was about student? Oh.
So it was what characteristics, and when you have students that come through here and you see them, like, I know there are times that we look at them, we're like, that's gonna be a successful technician right there.
Yeah.
I know what I think I see in them. I probably couldn't put a label on it. What is it that you notice in a particular one where, like, right from the beginning, you know they're going to go into it, they're going to be in it, and they're going to be successful?
Well, the first and foremost thing, as far as the student is concerned, is that they showed up on time. That's probably the first thing that kind of gets me headed that direction. And then it's just simply their involvement, like, say, in a demonstration or in listening to you, how you think they should alter what they're doing, or that you give them a suggestion on, hey, you could do this now at this point too. If the student then picks up and repeats what you've shared with them the next day, the next week, or whatever, then
that's a good point.
That student is carrying that forward, and he or she has a passion for remembering that kind of stuff. The student where you're telling them the same thing over and over, even during the same day, there's a disconnect in there. And whether that's maybe they have a learning disability that's not noticeable, I don't know. But
see, I actually had that situation, and what it took was making them record or write down things. They thought that it was going to take so much time to do that, but it turns out that actually sped them up quite a bit.
Yeah. And that's something we have to realize, that everybody learns differently.
And I'm one of those people.
Yeah. And so I think that was really the big thing about being in the classroom with students, is that you also got to figure out how they learn. Mm-hmm. Not just having to do a bunch of trial and error stuff in the lab, but if you explain something to someone and they look at you like...
how they absorb the material.
Yes.
Like watching, whether, they talk about visual learning, auditory learning.
Yeah.
And when you're in that classroom with them, and Marshall was always really good at this, he could look at you and he knew if you had a question, and he would stop you before you even walked out. He'd be like, you had a question, right?
Yeah. And that's what you're supposed to do. I mean, is key in on that kind of thing so that you can help that student. And it also helps you as an educator to figure out, how do I need to talk to that person to help them? Now, when you run out of ideas, you've worked on the auditory, you've had them make notes, you've showed them 3 times, and they still aren't doing what is basic things, then it kind of makes you wonder why they're in this industry.
So that's when we have the discussion with them. Do you want to be here?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't really seem like you want to be here. And if you want to be here, you're going to kind of have to prove yourself or figure something out here, guy.
And, we've had students that are like that, and they muddle through the semesters, and they actually finally graduate. And they get a job in a shop, and we're out somewhere visiting with the industry or whatever, going to that shop, and we happen to notice somebody over in the corner or on the other side that we recognize, and you go over there and they're doing great work. And it just makes you feel good that somehow or another, because maybe they ran into someone that really influenced them after here, who knows, but at least you know that they've found something that they really like, and that really boosts your feelings about that and about them, that you figured they were going to fail.
It really makes us sound really selfish, how we're talking about all the things we get out of being educators, right?
But that's what makes it good. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think they realize how much we got from them as much as they got from us.
Right.
Okay, so I'm trying to think of which one I want to go with. All right, I think we've gone way over an hour. So I want to ask you this, and don't say any names, and I probably won't know, and I'm going to ask afterward. Y'all won't get to know. I want you to tell the funniest student story, and maybe they're watching and maybe they'll know who you're talking about. Think back, because one of the things that we loved was getting together in the office and cracking up over, and we're not making fun of you guys, but there are times that there are things that are very funny.
Well, this happened a long time ago, so I don't know if this particular student is even still in the industry. But this particular student in my basic metal repair class, while we're all doing a lot of body filler work and we're shredding, and there's shredder piles all over the place and everything, this person had a real tough time of keeping his pants elevated. I guess he didn't know what a belt was, and it was about the same time that many years ago when that was starting to become a fad everywhere. So
we have a dress code in the collision department, by the way, but and that's not on it.
Even if we didn't have that, the fact that his britches just kept going down further and further, especially while he's sanding, and he didn't seem to mind. So I would get over to the side, after class, and I'd say, it'd be nice if you could find a belt or try to.
It's a safety hazard.
Try to
for
keep
one.
Your pants up, So he failed to do that. So I enlisted 3 or 4 of the other students off to the side, and I said, anytime these seem to go down a little too far, I want you to grab a handful of shredder and just drop it in there. And so over the course of the afternoon, of course, his pants started going down more because he started getting a lot of shredder filings in there. And eventually, on his trip over to get some body filler or something, he decided to hike his pants up, and he got quite a surprise. So then he went in the bathroom, of course, and took care of that. But, the next week when he came in, he was wearing a belt. And that was the end of that.
Oh, goodness. That's hilarious. I really thought you were going to go with the pony story.
The pony story? I don't know if I remember the pony story.
Somebody was late to class and they had seen a pony.
Oh, that was me and somebody else. That was a long time ago when I was When I was a student, it was either me and Fowler or me and this other person we used to call Papa Smurf. And we were almost late to class, and we were coming up the Crest Road.
Mm-hmm.
And there was this brilliantly white pony out in the middle of this field.
Mm-hmm.
And we stopped to look at it. You know, having a background in horses, and he kind of liked horses too. And we just chatted about this. And then all of a sudden we realized we were late to class. And so we go to class. It was Mr. Carter's class in advanced collision. So it probably was Fowler. And we said, you know, we're sorry we're late. It was the only time we'd ever been late because we saw this white horse down the road, white pony. And he said, later when I come back as an instructor, I had that conversation with him. And he said, yeah, I remember that. And I didn't believe a word y'all said.
I'm pretty sure you had a student that used that against you, though, when they were late and said they saw a pink pony.
Oh, may have, but I don't remember that one anymore. Anyway, we got our attendance validated because after the day was over, he drove down and saw the same white horse, and it was okay. The pink pony. I wish I could remember that one offhand.
I'll tell you afterward.
All right.
So, if you had any final thing to say, I'm going to go with, you think it's been worth it? Everything that you've done throughout. Y'all didn't even get to hear about how he worked on custom planes for NASCAR drivers
and
things like that. Maybe we'll have another episode for that. But out of everything and at the point you're at now, has it all been worth it? If you got the choice to go back and be something else, a doctor, whatever it was,
yeah. Well,
would you do it all over again?
Everything, if I go back and look at how everything laid out, for the most part, it's been a pretty good ride. And it's good because, like I mentioned earlier, everything's so intertwined with everything. And so, gosh, yes, it has been worth it because everything just seems to flow together. You know, your lifestyle away from here is able to incorporate into that. And yeah, it's been good. And it's obviously,
it becomes a lifestyle itself.
It does. And it's where my passion has been, and I can't get away from it. Even at home, if I'm looking for something to do, I'm either drawing a car, looking at a magazine, looking at something on the web that's car related. I mean, and it's not that we're like car nerds or anything, if you want to go that way. It's just that we enjoy the whole aspect of it.
Even the information is interesting.
Yes. Yeah. When something comes out that's new, you got to go and read about it and learn about it.
Like the laser welding.
Like laser welding that's fixing to come into play. Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, it's been worth it. And, yeah, I wouldn't change much of anything.
So, you would advise being a repair tech? You would advise being an educator?
Well, all of those kind of go hand in hand if you're into the industry. If your passion is not just watching TV to see how Chip Foose does a car, if that spurs you to want to learn how to do it, then you're probably headed in the right direction. Instead of just going, that was really cool. I'm pretty sure I could do that, but never do it or never try, then your passion's not there. So just follow your passion. And if you try something, you know, going to a technical school is not a bad thing, because if it's a big enough school and you don't like where you're at, there's 60 or 70 other things that you can get into.
We have them come in and they would be in collision. Then they'd want to go to diesel, or they'd go to automotive, or they'd go to welding.
Or those people would come to us and say, oh, we really like this. So, yeah, just don't get stalled on something that you don't want to go to work to every day. If you, like, what do they say? If you don't mind going to work. If you
enjoy what you do, you'll never work a day in your life.
There you go. And that's exactly what it is. So, yeah, there's times when you say, I wish I didn't have to go to work today, but most of the time, no. So it's a good industry. And I'm sure there's other industries that could say the same thing.
He's lying. We're the best.
just do what you really enjoy. And if this is it, then great, enjoy it.
Okay. Well, thank you for
You're
your
welcome.
time, Mr. Marshall.